Good morning and welcome to DSW's webinar for the new Level 3 Team Leader, Unpacking the New Assessment Plan. My name's Sam Perry. I'm the Product Owner for Team Leader here at DSW, so I have been in charge of the development of the toolkit and all of the supporting materials. I'm joined by my colleague Zara from the quality team, who will be manning the question and answer towards the end of this webinar. So during this webinar, we will be having a look at the overview of the standard, the on-programme and gateway requirements, the assessment methods themselves, the professional discussion underpinned by a portfolio of evidence, and the presentation with questions, grading, supporting resources, specifically the amplification, and then the Q&A at the end. So the overview of the Team Leader Standard then. So the on-programme period is around 2 years. The EPA period is typically 3 months in duration. There is no max for this duration. Usually all assessments are to be completed within that 3, but it's not a maximum. So when the apprentice is ready for their assessment, they must make sure they have their gateway declaration, the proof of the Level 2 English and Maths, their portfolio of evidence, and the supporting referencing table with them. Once all these have been approved, they will come into the EPA period. The planning meeting is as standard. In this planning meeting, all of the assessment dates will be agreed, and any submission deadlines as well. Apprentices are permitted to be a part of those planning meetings, and DSW does encourage this. This allows the apprentice to be introduced to the assessor right from the start of their EPA journey. And it just allows for better, smoother communications around the assessment dates and the deadlines. Looking at the presentation with questions specifically then, the materials for the presentation must be submitted to DSW a maximum of 4 weeks after gateway. Once these materials have been submitted, there will be a 2-week minimum break between the submission of the materials and the sitting of the presentation and questioning method. The professional discussion, which is underpinned by the portfolio of evidence, that will take place a minimum of 2 weeks after gateway. So looking at the gateway a little bit more specifically then. So we've discussed you have to submit a gateway declaration, the proof of the English and Maths Level 2, and the portfolio of evidence completed with the referencing table. A policy and a process we've had to implement for this new Team Leader Standard is the portfolio itself is actually to be submitted to DSW a minimum of 2 working days before the planned gateway. The reason for this is to allow the assessor to review the portfolio of evidence before the apprentice gets to gateway, and so they can select and provide the apprentice with a presentation topic for them to develop their presentation materials within the 4-week period after gateway. The presentation topic will be provided upon the approval of gateway in the presentation topic confirmation document. And again, this will be provided or will be available for download once the gateway has been approved, and that will then allow the apprentice to develop their materials. So the portfolio of evidence, this is a showcase of the apprentice's best work. It should focus on the best pieces of evidence an apprentice can provide to evidence the descriptors for their assessment methods. We should be focusing on quality rather than quantity, as it is supposed to be a showcase. The supporting materials to aid in the development of the portfolio is the amplification document and DSW's portfolio requirements. The portfolio requirements document is available for download now on EPA Pro, and the amplification will be made available within the toolkit once that is published. And just a side note, the toolkit will be published following this webinar and by the end of the week at the latest. So having a look at the professional discussion. So this assessment method includes 11 pass criteria and 3 distinction. This is a structured based assessment method in which a conversation will be had between the apprentice and the assessor. The assessor will use the portfolio to base their conversation and to target all of the descriptors within the assessment method. The assessment method itself will last for a maximum of 60 minutes, and there is an additional 10% that can be added on at the assessor's discretion. This is to allow the apprentice to come to a natural stopping point in their response, rather than cutting them off halfway through. When the assessor is reviewing the portfolio of evidence in preparation for this assessment, they will prepare 7 discussion points based around the evidence provided in that portfolio. For each core discussion point the assessor can ask, they can also ask follow-up questions, and they have an unlimited number to use. This is to facilitate the natural, free-flowing conversation that a professional discussion should be, to probe for any further context, information, or evidence that may be required. The professional discussion will take place 2 weeks as a minimum after Gateway, but there is no maximum. The apprentice can take their portfolio, the referencing table, and any other notes into their discussion that they wish to. The supporting documents for this assessment method is the amplification again, the conditions for live assessment, and sample questions that we have developed. The conditions for live assessment are currently live and available on EPA Pro for you to download. The amplification and sample questions will be embedded within the toolkit once that's live. So moving on to the presentation with questions. This assessment method consists of 8 pass and 4 distinction, and it must include the following areas: a summary of their role as a team leader, data collection and benchmarking, problem analysis and conclusions, people and relationships, future plans and operations. The apprentice will have 4 weeks after they have been approved for Gateway to create their presentation materials and submit them to DSW ready for their assessment. Once these materials have been submitted, they cannot be amended and resubmitted. So once the materials have been submitted, the presentation will have a minimum of the presentation will take place a minimum of 2 weeks following that submission. The presentation and questioning will last for a maximum of 50 minutes. And again, there is the discretionary 10% that can be added. The presentation must last for 22 minutes. The assessor will cut the the assessment of the presentation off at 22 minutes, and this is to allow for sufficient timing for the questioning session. It is recommended apprentices practice their presentation to make sure it is around the 20 to 22 minute mark. For the questioning, there will be a minimum of 30 minutes. And within that questioning session, the assessor will ask a minimum of 5 questions and a maximum of 12. For each core question the assessor asks, they can use 2 follow-up questions, again to probe for additional information, context, or evidence. Grading of the assessment methods is pretty straightforward. Available is a pass and a distinction. To meet in both assessment methods, to achieve a pass, they must meet all pass descriptors. To achieve a distinction, they must meet all the pass and all the distinction descriptors. And that goes for both assessment methods, the professional discussion and the presentation with questions. This translates through to the overall grading. So for each assessment method, in order to achieve an overall grade of a pass, apprentices must achieve a pass in both assessment methods, and for the distinction, a distinction in both assessment methods. So the supporting resources DSW offers for this standard, we have the amplification, the portfolio referencing table, the sample questions, the presentation writing guidance. These documents will be embedded within the toolkit, and that will be made available to you once that's published following this webinar and at the latest by the end of the week. Already available for you to use, we have DSW's portfolio requirements document and our conditions for live assessments. We also have document templates for the portfolio, context statements, witness testimonies, and observations. We also have and would direct you to our YouTube channel, on which we have previous webinars and videos around other assessment methods and how to build good portfolios of evidences. Specifically looking at the amplification now. So DSW develops the amplification document, and we believe this is one of the most important documents we can provide. The purpose is to provide clarity and simplify any areas within the assessment descriptors that could be complex, vague, or ambiguous. In the example that I'll show you on the next slide, you will notice where we provide lists, these are not exhaustive. They are just examples to give apprentices, training providers, and our assessors a better understanding of what needs to be provided within the evidence for that descriptor. As I've mentioned, the amplification is available in the toolkit once that is published. So having a look at this example, so this is taken from the amplification for the new team leader. And what you can see here is at the very top, we've got our KSB area or theme KSB, so data collection and benchmarking. We've then got the KSB in the first column, and then the grading descriptor to which the apprentice must meet. The last column is the amplification itself. And in here, what we've done initially is to break apart the descriptor and try to rewrite it in a clearer, more concise and informative way. So it should give you a really good idea of exactly what the apprentice needs to provide in their evidence. So for this one, the apprentice must provide an overview of one process, and one policy they followed to support the delivery of their topic. So you can see it's been quantified, one process and one policy must be provided. As part of their overview, the apprentice must give an example for each of the following that impact their role and organisation. Regulation, legislation. The apprentice must also detail how they are compliant with each of the above. So there we have a breakdown of exactly what is required to meet the descriptor. Underneath this initial breakdown, we then have some words and terminologies or phrases that we've identified in the descriptor that could be open to interpretation. And so we have provided a definition with some examples which are not limited. So if we have a look at compliance, compliance refers to the adherence to the laws, regulations and rules that govern how they and their organisation work. It includes but is not limited to, and then a list is provided. Apprentices can provide other examples not included in that list. Again, we've only provided a handful of examples just to better give an understanding of to what we are referring. And with that, we'll now move on to the question and answer session where we will address and answer some of your questions.
Okay, so the first question that we've got is, we don't have access to EPA Pro. Please, can you advise how we access this recording, and can we have copies of this presentation after, please?
So the recording will be made available to you all via the YouTube channel, and the link to that will be sent out to you. And yes, this webinar slides will also be made available to you following the completion.
Okay. Next question is there a limit to how many pages of notes an apprentice can bring into the endpoint assessment?
No, there is not. I would direct you to our conditions for live assessment. But for this standard, there are no limits to the amount of notes an apprentice can take with them to their assessment methods.
Yeah, and I'd probably say if they use the portfolio guidance document, and that gives a breakdown, any recordings, the length of the recordings, the types of evidence that they can gather, that'd be really helpful for them to use alongside our toolkit for that. Next question, and I guess the same again, it would refer to that. Is there a minimum or maximum amount of portfolio evidence that the learner can submit?
There isn't a minimum or a maximum, no. The toolkit will suggest a typical number of pieces of evidence. There must be one piece of evidence mapped to the assessment descriptors within the portfolio referencing table. And we would always just encourage them to make sure their evidence is the best they can provide, rather than providing loads of different pieces of evidence which may or may not cover the descriptor in its entirety. So again, it's more quality than quantity.
Okay. Another question is, what is the best website to get the new standards?
So all assessment plans are published by IFATE, and they are available on their website. You just go onto the IFATE website and search for the standard you're looking for. All of our toolkits and supporting materials for all our standards, not just Team Leader, are available on EPA Pro for your access.
Is it okay to use other models outside of the suggested theories within the amplification document?
Absolutely, yes. So as I discussed, these are just examples. We can't include every single example provided, otherwise the document would be huge. We just have given a snapshot of some of the things that can be included to give a better understanding, but the apprentice is permitted to include other examples not provided in those lists.
And how many EPA presentation titles are there?
So DSW has developed a bank, which is an internal document. It won't be shared externally. The reason for that is to ensure fair assessment for all apprentices and to make sure training providers or apprentices don't select one themselves before being provided one by DSW and our independent assessor. The assessment plan does provide some example titles. We have used some of those in our internal bank. So there are some provided in the assessment plan already, but we won't be sharing our bank in full with you.
Okay, still on the presentation, will there be a presentation referencing grid?
We haven't developed one currently. The rationale behind that is the assessor doesn't need to see the presentation before sitting the assessment method. And so the assessor will use what the apprentice provides in their presentation to plan the questions they are going to ask in the questioning session. It is advised apprentices try to make note or make reference to the descriptors they are going to target on each slide and with the information they provide in each slide, but no, there is no specific referencing table for the presentation.
Another question on the presentation, are the topics for the presentation staying the same?
I'm guessing, so staying the same from the current team leader to this new one. No, I think some of them that are provided in the assessment plan, they are similar, if not the same. However, as I've just discussed, we have developed our own internal bank with a range of different presentation topics that an assessor can provide to the apprentice.
And are there any resources available to support the delivery of programme training?
So the only document and the best document we can provide is that amplification. So it does provide a clear directive to the types of evidence an apprentice should have when preparing for their assessment methods, what evidence they should be providing in their portfolio of evidence. And that document isn't just for apprentices to use. Training providers can use it as well to support them in the delivery and the development of their curriculum. But other than that, no, we don't provide any other curriculum supportive documents.
Okay, and you mentioned 2 weeks from submission to live assessments. Is there a maximum window? So, for example, 2 months from submission to live endpoint assessment?
So the only maximum there is for the presentation materials. So the presentation materials must be submitted to DSW a maximum of 4 weeks after Gateway, and once they've been provided with their presentation topic. Other than that, the sitting of the presentation itself and the sitting of the professional discussion, those timelines are minimums, so there are no maximums. So following the submission of the presentation materials, as long as there is a minimum of 2 weeks, the apprentice can sit it 3 weeks after submission, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and so on. And the same goes for the professional discussion.
The professional discussion component that you've just mentioned, so there's a question here around that. So for the professional discussion, it's purely based around the showcase evidence, Are learners allowed to provide other examples outside of the portfolio or not during the presentation, during the professional discussion to add more weight?
Absolutely, yes. So obviously the professional discussion is supported by the portfolio of evidence, and that portfolio of evidence is provided or is collated before Gateway, and so the apprentice in their work between submission of their portfolio and the sitting of their assessment methods, they could have a better example that they didn't have at the time. They are, of course, permitted to use that and to reference that evidence and provide that in their assessment methods.
And the next question, will the apprentice still receive detailed feedback following the completion of their assessment?
Yes, they will. So recently, earlier this year, we launched new assessment records. That new assessment record does apply to this standard as it does for the previous version of Team Leader and all our other standards where we deliver. The exact nature of the feedback will be the same. There are no changes there, and the document will be the same as well.
The next question, can the discussion and the presentation be completed on the same day?
Yes, they can. There is no rules mandating they can't be. I think most of our assessments are completed on the same day. It's down to the preference of the apprentice as to whether they want to do that or not, but they can be, yes.
And in the amplification, do they have to cover all the suggested methods in order to meet the criteria? What if they only use alternative methods?
If they use alternative methods that aren't provided in the lists, that's completely fine. As long as the apprentice can demonstrate their understanding, their application, whatever the command verb on that descriptor is, as long as the apprentice can demonstrate an understanding, application of, an evaluation of, that is completely fine. They don't have to stick to the lists provided.
Okay, and is there a maximum amount of time from uploading the presentation to sit in the presentation itself?
So yes, it's a maximum of 4 weeks. So once the apprentice has submitted their materials, in fact, following Gateway, there is a maximum 4-week period in which they have to submit their materials.
Okay, and if an apprentice failed their first presentation attempt, would they be issued a new topic for their resit?
Yes, they would. That's stipulated in the assessment plan, in the resit and retake rules. So should the apprentice fail their initial attempt at their presentation, a new presentation topic would have to be provided by DSW and our independent assessor.
And are there any stipulations on the assessment methods used to gather evidence within the portfolio? I think we kind of answered that earlier, didn't we, with the using the portfolio guidance document. So I would just refer to that and make sure that you're in line, obviously, with our guidance on that. How long, so obviously we've just mentioned there about the resit. Another question, how long do they get to work on a failed presentation before they have to upload the revised presentation?
So the assessment plan to which our guidance and our toolkit is based and follows, failed assessment methods must be reset or retaken within 6 months of the initial fail notification. So should an apprentice fail their presentation or their professional discussion, they must resit within 6 months of them getting the fail notification.
And just regarding the toolkit, are there sample questions within the toolkit?
There are, yes. It's one document that will be embedded within the toolkit, and within that document there are questions for both the professional discussion and the presentation with questions.
And another question on here, is the previous team leader apprenticeship still live?
It is, yes. So the old one or the current one is still going. We still do have apprentices on that standard and in assessments on that standard. So it is still live, yes. Under the new, it's just worth mentioning here, under the new ESFA funding rules, it is now possible for apprentices registered on the old version, the 1.2 version of the assessment plan. They can jump forward and move on to this new version. So team leader or supervisor onto team leader. If they do jump forward, they can't then go backwards. And any apprentices who are registered on this new version, the team leader, they cannot go backwards and register with the other or any of the other versions.
And the last question on here is, if the presentation materials can be submitted 4 weeks from Gateway and the title is available when they enter Gateway, does that mean that they can have 4 weeks to put their presentation together?
Yes, that is correct.
Fab. And that's it for the end of questions.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'd just like to take this opportunity now to thank you all for your attendance. We do hope you have found this beneficial and the information provided within this webinar to be informative. I'd also like to thank my colleague Zara from the quality team in supporting and the wider DSW team for supporting the delivery of this webinar. As I've said throughout the webinar, the toolkit will be made available following this webinar, and that will be latest end of the week. Within that toolkit are all the supporting documents we've mentioned. If you do have any other questions, comments or concerns you would like to raise with us, please feel free to drop us an email or give the office a call. We will also be adding in a survey following this webinar. If you could all take some time and fill that in, it'll allow us to understand a little bit better how these webinars are received and what we could do in the future to improve them. But once again, I'd like to thank you all for your patience and your attendance today, and I hope you found it beneficial. And with that, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your days. Bye-bye.